Now let's look at lesson 5. Words 5 through 10 come to us, I think, in thought pairs. The 6th word naturally pairs with the 5th. Honor the life givers leads to don't be a life taker. So listen for this word. Exodus 20, verse 13. You shall not murder. Now, so far, each of the words has come with some explanation or a promise attached. When we get to the 6th word, it is short, terse, and to the point. There is no explanation, there are no exceptions, and there is no wiggle room. God just says it flat out. 2 words in Hebrew, only 2 words in Hebrew. No murder. If you want to live this life with me you claim to want, God says you can't kill each other. No murder, period. Now, the issue within this word is the struggle over whether or not there are limits to honoring life. We've learned that we are to honor life. Now we have to ponder, is it ever appropriate to take a life? This may seem like a no-brainer. What could we possibly find to discuss here? After all, most of us have not killed anyone, although some of us may have in an accident or in war or in some other ways. But my assumption is that most of us have learned to somehow manage our murderous impulses most of the time. As you may already suspect, however, we've got to push this one a little more deeply as well. Much of the controversy with this word swirls around the Hebrew word that's used here that we translate as murder. It's not the most commonly used Hebrew word for to kill. It's not that word to kill we see more often in the Hebrew Scriptures. Well, we learn from the other rare cases of this particular word's use in the Old Testament that this command can be understood very broadly indeed. The word has to do with executing vengeance or destruction. Some say that it requires malice. Others say that it doesn't. But here's the kicker. Here's the thing. This is the thing that sets us back on our heels here. This word applies to both active and passive actions. It is used of things that we choose to do, take out a gun and shoot you. And it is used of things that happen without our conscious choice that we do nothing to prevent. Yikes. It refers to any taking of a human life in any way, under any circumstances, and it also refers to all acts of violence and retaliation that impart grievous harm that cannot be undone. This word refers to destroying anything that one does not have the power to create. And it also refers to the slow and often unnoticed destruction that takes place little bit by little bit, small choice by small choice over time. The ancient and modern scholars that I read understood murder in this context as the opposite of creation. It is the willful or ignorant disregard of the created order. Early on in our family story, our ancestors began to talk about the command no murder as being a prohibition against robbing God. Only God is to have the power of life and death. Even in the bloodiest times in the Old Testament, when the people believed that they were being instructed to kill, they always saw it as being at God's command or to somehow vindicate God, and therefore it was God doing it, through them granted, but still God's choice and not their own. Now, there were certainly times when, no doubt, we as God's people got that wrong, thought it was God when it was just our ego, but that is a conversation for another day. And one that Jesus himself thought we needed to have, by the way. In the New Testament, Jesus takes this command to even deeper levels reminding us that murder takes place in the attitudes of the heart just as effectively as it does with a gun or a knife. Whenever we destroy, we violate the sixth word. And we can do that in many ways, as potent and damaging as picking up a weapon. Whether we light the fuse or whether we do nothing about the issue that led the lighter to light it, we stand convicted by this word. In the light of this word, those who do nothing to stop murder are indeed murderers themselves. And it is not just limited to the ending of biological life. One of the ways that the ancient rabbis understood murder to be most potent was in the destruction of a reputation or of self-esteem. They considered that criticism and gossip were deadly weapons and violations against this word because they took life in ways that could not be turned around. Remember that words are not abstract in our theology. Words do things. They set in motion dynamics that can often not be reversed. The prophetic word, once spoken, cannot be turned back. Think about Jacob tricking his father to get his blessing, tricking it to get it away from his brother Esau. And once his father had spoken that blessing, he couldn't just take it back. The prophetic word, once spoken, cannot be turned around. Once spoken, it couldn't be taken back. And apparently gossip has that same quality. And the rabbis have understood that from the very beginning of the very beginning. It has always been a problem in the community of God's people. As a matter of fact, the damage that gossip can do shows up in the ancient commentaries on at least 3 of the different commandments, this being one of them. Think about that for a moment. Have you ever been sliced to the core by the words of a loved one? I know that I have. I remember a number of years ago, this was back in my previous marriage, I had been ill again, and I was walking from our bedroom to the bathroom, and my then husband laughed and looked at me, and he said, "You look like a sheepdog from behind. You're defective." It has been a quarter of a century since those words were spoken to me, and I still feel it in my body as I tell that story. Has part of you ever died from the cruel action or inaction of another? All of that is covered in this word. Another form of murder often mentioned in connection with this word is keeping silent in the presence of the death-dealing realities of one's day and thereby remaining complicit with no thought and no repentance. The Bible would say that that in itself is murder most foul. So often in the divided times in which we live, I hear friends or family members say to me that they just can't watch the news anymore. It's too awful. Now, I sure understand that, and we all need to place some limits on the talking heads and their echo chambers. However, what this word asks us to remember is that which we refuse to acknowledge and address, we are complicit in. That just takes my breath away. Here's the bottom line of this word. When we remain silent in the face of injustice, it is murder most foul. When we remain silent in the face of social policy that values some and is blind to others, it is murder most foul. When we remain silent in the presence of a culture that degrades anyone, that is a violation of this word. When we keep silent, we violate by our apathy the deep call that is at the heart of the sixth word. Silence and giving up are just as murderous weapons as a sharp tongue that cuts out the heart or a bullet that tears the flesh. To live our love story as God's people, somehow God knew from the get-go that somehow we must learn not to kill each other, not with a weapon, not with a word, not with an action, and not with our apathy. The taking of life is never a good, y'all. We may, as a people, decide that in some circumstances it is a necessity, but as God's people, we must be very clear that we have departed from the goal of our life and taken the prerogative of God into our own hands when we do. We may decide somehow that we must to protect ourselves or somehow create stability, but it is never a good. It is always an evil, even if a necessary one. It is interesting as well to consider this word for our own personal lives. There certainly are ways that we commit a kind of murder of ourselves when we refuse to address death-dealing personal habits. That's murder. When we refuse to set boundaries and burn out completely, that's murder. When we exclude people in our faith communities and make it impossible for them to use their gifts, y'all, that is murder. It is murder most foul. When we refuse to address unjust systems or refuse to look at the isms that rule our lives, it's murder. When some lives matter and others matter less so, that is murder, according to the deep values of this word. When our ease or our affluence or even our understandings threaten the planet entrusted to our care, then, dear sisters, it is murder. It is destroying something we cannot create. When we destroy anything we cannot create, we rob God. God says in this love story of ours, you can't kill each other. Put down your weapons, sheathe your tongue, and don't stand by frozen when others do it in your name. No murder.